Hey, this is Ron Coddington from Military Image Magazine coming to you tonight for Season 3, Episode 9 of Military Images Live. Really glad to be here, and we hope that you're being safe and being healthy in mind and spirit. Super excited to be here tonight, and we're waiting for folks to come on right now. Gene McCallum, Kevin Canberg is here. Others are joining. And while we're waiting, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor tonight. This is Perry Adams Antiques. Perry Adams, Bill and Ben do a fantastic job with all of the Civil War militaria that they have to offer. They don't just focus on photography. They've got textiles, they've got uniforms, caps, wonderful items, an array of Civil War collectibles, including photographs, but so much more. And I'm proud to tell you that they are fantastic to work with, and they're advertisers in Military Images Magazine. And I learned this week that they've recently redesigned their site. So if you get a chance to go onto Perry Adams and check out their offerings, you can also see their beautiful new interface. It's clean, it's elegant, much like Perry Adams, and you'll have a great experience when you go there. I certainly did. So look for Perry Adams and go and shop and see what you can find. So, I got more folks coming on. Rick Wolf is here. Dale Neeson is here. Carol Coddington, happy Mother's Day, is here. And so happy for all of you to join us. While we've got a few announcements, I want to make this one. Last episode of Military Images, I talked a little bit about digitizing photographs, and I showed you the process. I should say I walked you through a bit of the history of the process and how we do what we do today. During the show, there was a lot of interest in doing a class to take it beyond the demo. I began to look around to find out what the best way to have a class would be. And because I'm going to be sharing my screen and showing you some tips and techniques, I really can't do that well on Facebook. So for this particular event, we're switching to Zoom. And if you go to Military Images on Facebook, you'll find the sign up. You can fill out a quick form. We'll collect your name, we'll collect your email address, and then I'll send you the meeting invite and the password protection. So sign up for the class. We've already got a good number of people, but because it's Zoom, there's plenty of room for more. So come one, come all. If you're interested to learn how we digitize images for the magazine, and digitizing means the scanning and then how we basically add the lighting and use photojournalism techniques to be honest to what we have, check it out. So Zoom, that class, by the way, I should mention, is this Thursday at 8 p.m. So join us live, sign up for the class, and we'll give you some tips and tricks to make your images shine when you're sharing them. Also want to mention my good friend Dale Neeson over at the Image Collector. I'm pleased to announce a partnership that Military Images has. If you go over and visit Dale's page on Facebook, you'll see this ad, excuse me, which is announcing the partnership on Memorial Day weekend. Folks who are members of the page can submit their favorite image and a story about why that image is important for them. Now, I realize that not everyone has one image that they can point to as a favorite. I certainly don't. In some way, they're all favorites of mine, but there are some images that stand out or ones that I would like to share. So I'm looking for one image that's really special to you, and for you to tell me why. And if you're a member of Dale's page or you're going to become a member of Dale's page, You can put that image there, you can put your story there, and then I'll follow up with you to get a high resolution image, which means you'll have to go to the class. And then we'll publish selected images in an upcoming issue of the magazine. So go visit Image Collector. Also, you can visit Military Images on Facebook, and we'll send you there. And while I'm making announcements, one more. You're familiar with our series Caretakers, which is a partnership with the Civil War Photo Collector Society and Doug York over at Civil War Faces. Caretakers is interviews with collectors who are sharing their own collections. And this Saturday coming up is Dana Schoaf, who some or many of you know is the editor of Civil War Times. We're very pleased to have him. Dana is a collector of Civil War photography, as is his wife, Heidi. She also collects old photos. So Dana is going to talk about his collection on the next episode of Caretakers, and that is this Saturday, this coming Saturday at 6:30 p.m. So stay tuned for more information. And tune in. That'll be on Civil War Faces. If you miss the episode, you can check that out on our playlist, the Military Images YouTube channel. We have a playlist for Caretakers. So stay tuned. Check it out. Now, I want to start tonight. Give you a little fun piece here. All of us, we look closely at the soldiers, the sailors, the civilians who are posed in images, and you wonder what the backstory is, right? You wonder how they got to take that pose. And in my travelings, in my internet wanderings over the past couple weeks, I was looking for information for a photographer called Rudolf Goble, and he worked in St. Charles, Missouri, in the 1860s, all the way up to the early 1900s. So he had a long career in photography. And he stayed in St. Charles the entire time, which is a little unusual. Not all photographers stay in one place for their entire career. But Rudolf, who was a German immigrant, did just that. I believe it would have been the 1870s when this particular photograph was taken, the back of the image caught my attention, because on the back, you can see in fine print here, he's making some suggestions about how to maximize your pose, how to make the best of your pose. And I want to read a couple of those to you. They may actually come in handy today, the next time you're going to pose for a photo. Number 1, when you're ready to be photographed, appoint an hour. Then come before you are worn out with shopping and other business. The light is best from 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. So be fresh, be on top of your game, and do not do any big shopping before you get that photo made. Item number 2, dress in good taste and don't add on too much. So when you get your pictures, your friends will recognize you. So lay off the makeup, lay off the whatever you're putting on. Don't do it. Just be yourself. That's what Rudolf says. Number 3, in sitting for a picture, be calm, be natural, and the result, as a general thing, will be good. So if you want goodness in your photograph, be yourself. A classic, right? Now, the last one here I'm going to mention because I like this. It's not really a tip, but it's a very positive glass half full comment by Mr. Goble. He says, since every face has its good points, there's the glass half full. Since every face has its good points, I invite all of those who have never had a good picture taken to give me a trial. So if you've never been happy and you lived in St. Charles, Missouri in 1870, you're not happy with your picture, Rudolf is pretty much laying it on the line that he's the man who can give you that glamour shot that you've always looked for. So that is Rudolf Goble and his tips for a great photo. Now, First segment for tonight. This showed up on eBay. You may have seen this. Raise your hand if you saw this on eBay. These are scrapbook pages. They're album pages. Let me know if you know what I'm talking about yet. All Confederate officers and Confederate politicians. 5 pages altogether, ending with what appears to be a carte de visite of General George Anderson. You've got, maybe about 15 or 20 images, combination of albumin photographs and cartes de visite. They've all been removed from their mounts and all pasted onto this sort of heavy quality stock. Most of the pages are green. Some have a brownish tint. Some of them have decoration around the edges. And do you know what they are yet? Some of you do. Some of you do. I knew it instantly, and I have to tell you, I was shocked. These are pages that come from none other than the Mallis Collection. The bulk of that collection is at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle Barracks. And Mallis, if you don't know, was the military order of the Loyal Legion of the United States from the Massachusetts Commandery, formed not long after the war. And a comment that caught my attention to give you some perspective around the Mallis Collection. This quote pretty much says it. The images from this Union Officer Veterans Organization are so vast and comprehensive that they are invaluable to American military history and to the story of the Army. How vast? How big? 136 big scrapbooks, 40,000. Yeah, 40,000 images. By last count, if you go to Carlisle Barracks, a story that I saw mentions, I think 23,000 of the images were scanned. So they're past the halfway point. Maybe they've scanned more since then. But that, my friends, that's a lot of Civil War photography. Now, here are some of the pages. If you go to the Mallis site, you'll see what I saw. For those of you who don't know the collection, all these images, all 40,000 of them, are mounted on these album pages. Most of them are Union, but there are also some Confederate pages in there. All of these are period photographs. You all know these images. If you don't know them through the Mallis Collection, some of the negatives that were purchased to make prints of to go in the Mallis Collection back in the 1880s, I believe it was, they're now in the Library of Congress. So when I say you know them because you may have seen those plates in the Library of Congress. The prints from some of those plates are among the 40,000 images. So, did I say 40,000? Now, the collection is the brainchild of 2 officers. This is Arnold Augustus Rand of the 4th Massachusetts Cavalry. Here he is. You can see this. This is from his actual page in one of the scrapbooks. And then Colonel Albert Ordway. This is also an image of him. These 2 guys are the ones who really put together the collection. And they put out an invitation, which I may have, they put out an invitation that I don't have with me at the moment, but the invitation basically calls for images to make the perfect collection of Civil War photography. So these guys did it. And I became very curious about how these 5 pages showed up on eBay, because to my knowledge, the Mallis album collection was fairly complete. At least I thought it was. And so in the images that were on eBay, two of them, and I believe they're images, let me see, I'm going to go back here for just a second to show you. Easier for me to show you, I think. Let's see here. If we go back, we're going to find that I'll show you. Right up here in the corner are the page numbers. There's 1101 is one number, and 604 is the other number. These two images become important. These two numbers become important because as I went to the Mallis site and began searching their entire collection, both digitized and non-digitized, guess what? Image 1101, or page 1101, and page 604 are both missing. Now, those pages belong to volume 13 and volume 23. And so each of these albums, by the way, contains about 50 pages. So these two pages are missing. And so I assume that the other 3 pages that were on eBay were also among the missing. So I contacted my friend, Randy Hackenberg, who is now retired from Carlisle Barracks. Randy is one of the true gentlemen of Civil War photography and Civil War collecting. Randy helped bring the collection to Carlisle Barracks way back in 1973. I dare say before many of us were collecting, maybe some of us were even born. I was 10, by the way. So Randy helped bring the collection, and I spoke with Randy, and he gave me some interesting bits of information. When they got the collection in 1973, not all of these albums were conveyed. At least 4 of them were missing: 13, 23, 42, and 68. And I remember 13 and 23 are the 2 that I found that had missing pages. So Randy immediately verified that the missing pages came from albums that in fact were never turned over to the Mallis Collection. Randy tells me that those albums were known as the Confederate albums. They had not been seen, but they had read descriptions of them, so they knew generally what the contents were. Now, it gets kind of interesting here because those albums have never been found, and it is presumed that at some point prior to 1973, they were carried away, perhaps by members of Mallis, perhaps given away as souvenirs. No one knows the origins. However, flash forward to 2001, when Mike McAfee, who sadly passed away last year, a senior editor of Military Images magazine, he found, or spotted, I should say, an auction which included an entire album from an entire missing album. That album was able to be stopped from going to auction and was taken over by, or somehow gotten into the hands of the U.S. AHEC in Carlisle Barracks. So these pages obviously belonged to the Mallis Collection, and to my knowledge, they are still not part of the Mallis Collection. The eBay auction went off, and someone purchased those pages. I know not whether they know what they have. So that's the story of something very surprising that I never expected to see on eBay. By the way, I should tell you, the 2 officers that I shared with you, Ordway and Rand, in my humble opinion, they're the first Civil War photo collectors. They're the guys who back in the 1880s saw something unique in these images and wanted to preserve them. So they managed to have that massive collection of 40,000 images. I know that I'm not quite there yet, and I'm willing to bet that you're not at the 40,000 number, but those guys were. Of course, they had a bit of an advantage because most of the folks in the photographs were still present and alive. So there you have it. Now, I'll take you for a trip down the research rabbit hole this evening. And tonight, we're going to meet George Alexander Batchelder. Wonderful pose of him. He's got quite the handsome jacket on, cut off at the waist. If we take a close look, we can see his staff officer's insignia on his cap. You can see his very nice 5th Corps badge. And turns out that Batchelder was fairly prominent as an officer. He started out in the 22nd Massachusetts Infantry, which was also known as Henry Wilson's Regiment, for this very prominent politician who donned the uniform of a colonel and then a brigadier general, and later continued his career in the Grant administration. Batchelder then goes on to be an aide de camp to this man, Fitz Porter. Fitz Porter, one of the more prominent generals in the Army of the Potomac during those early days. And Batchelder makes quite a name for himself. And he's one of those officers who is, as a captain, as a staff officer, he's sort of part of an elite cadre of officers in the Army of the Potomac. And so he enjoys a certain notoriety. If you want to have a pecking order or a hierarchy, certainly Batchelder is up there with it. Even more talk about your connections, military and political connections. He also then has family connections when Batchelder marries the daughter of Hannibal Hamlin. Now, you may recognize Hannibal Hamlin from portraits like this. You, of course, may also know of his connection to this man, for Hannibal Hamlin was Abraham Lincoln's first vice president. So Batchelder is not only connected militarily in the sort of that elite cadre of officers, but he's also connected to the most powerful man, to the commander-in-chief of all the U.S. armies. So, jumping a little ahead here, as I'm looking for information about Batchelder, and I've got this fairly stunning wartime record. We have his marriage to the daughter of a prominent politician. I find this book for Penobscot County, Maine, which has, among other things, has Hannibal Hamlin's genealogy and his family connections. It has a bunch of other folks, Union officers. It has long details, long biographical details of their service during the Civil War. And on this page in the history is George Alexander Batchelder's biography. Now, remember how I told you these officers have these very long bios, right? George Batchelder gets one line that simply says, he was in the war. He was a captain. That's all. Now, this is a huge red flag. It tells me one of two things. Someone of this guy's caliber, to get no more than a couple lines of a mention in the genealogy part of Hannibal Hamlin's illustrious family, tells me one of two things. Either he died young, a tragedy, or he did something that wasn't quite right, something that wasn't well received. In Batchelder's case, it's actually both. So let me take you up here till 1870. If you go to the papers of U.S. Grant, you're going to find that in May of 1870, he has an offer. Batchelder is extended an offer to be secretary of a place called Dakota Territory. And the folks who are endorsing his nomination, of course, his father-in-law, Hannibal Hamlin, but you've got Henry Wilson, who is now the prominent politician, and another Massachusetts icon, Charles Sumner. They're all behind Batchelder to be able to give him his due as secretary of Dakota territory. And they've got some effusive language that talks about he was such he's a well-deserving officer, Batchelder is. He distinguished himself in the war. He's a commendable guy, highly recommended. And of course, Ulysses S. Grant, he's listening to those around him, and U.S. Grant says, why, sure, good, solid Army stock, let's have him. So 1870, Batchelder gets this appointment as Secretary of Dakota Territory. Now, before he leaves to go to Dakota Territory, he writes a book that's based on a history. It's a geological history. It's a history of the land, the people of Dakota Territory. This book, maybe more of a pamphlet, but he writes this book, and it really helps do a couple of things. It helps him get off to a great start. It's like, oh my gosh, he's already written a book about Dakota Territory, and he hasn't even become the secretary yet. But it's also a bit motivated by money here, because he's actually, Batchelder is feeding this frenzy about gold and rich minerals in the Black Hills. So part of the rush that's going on that time for gold is thanks to Batchelder's book, which some people say is sort of the earliest volume that really helped propel this movement, this rush out to Dakota Territory for gold. Now, of course, in Dakota Territory, the provisional capital, the territorial capital, is in Yankton, Dakota Territory. Now, sidelight here, going off the charts, Deadwood, one of my favorite shows, HBO. Deadwood, one of my favorite episodes is when George Crook comes through Deadwood. Deadwood, the town, is always messing with Yankton. They got some bad blood there. You know George Crook from his war years. Here's the real George Crook. So a bit of a diversion. But Yankton figures prominently in here. By this time, our good friend Batchelder has actually showed up in Yankton and Dakota Territory. And not only that, he brings his father-in-law with him. Hannibal Hamlin comes out. He visits Dakota Territory. He, of course, is well received. The beloved vice president of the martyred, the beloved vice president of the martyred president comes out, has a successful trip. He's proud of his son-in-law. Well, all this does not last very long. If we go back to the papers of Ulysses S. Grant, we see this document here, October 2nd, 1871. So we might be about a year into Batchelder's reign as secretary. And basically, we have a petition here from Andrew Sweetser, who says, we, as citizens of the city of Yankton, the capital of the territory of Dakota, most respectfully submit that we are personally acquainted with George A. Batchelder, the Secretary of Dakota, that we have known him since taking charge of said office, that his course as an official has not commanded respect and confidence, and that his private conduct has been reckless, dissipated, and licentious. Therefore, we earnestly petition for the removal of the said George A. Batchelder from the secretaryship of this territory. Hamlin tries to smooth it over, doesn't work. U.S. Grant says, I've had enough, and Batchelder is out. Story does not end well for Batchelder. He's disgraced. He winds up in Washington, D.C. If you go through newspapers.com, you'll find this rather poignant obituary. The yellow section is highlighted here for you. It says he was son-in-law of ex-Vice President Hannibal Hamlin. Successive letters and telegrams explaining the destitute and dying condition of Batchelder. He had tuberculosis. He was out of money. Holed up in Washington. The telegrams explaining his condition failed to elicit any response from his father-in-law. basically Hannibal Hamlin has disowned him. And the failing to elicit any response, he died unattended, and strangers purchased a coffin for him and had him buried in Arlington National Cemetery. The plot thickens a little bit here because if you search the Arlington National Cemetery website, the ANC Explorer, I can't find any listing for George A. Batchelder. He might be there somewhere. He might be among the unknowns. I don't know. But he leaves off, his story ends in 1875, dying of tuberculosis in Washington, D.C., destitute, disowned, a massive fall from grace. So, the story of George A. Batchelder. If you're doing research and you come across this unusual combination of someone who was a war success and then his record trails off unexpectedly, it's a decent bet. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but it's a pretty good bet that something befell him after the war. So there you have it. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight. I'm going to conclude this episode of Military Images Live. I hope you enjoyed it. Come visit us on Thursday. Sign up for the digital class. If you can't make that, we'll have it on YouTube along with this video. And we'll be back with a new episode. Stay healthy in body and mind. Take care of yourselves and your families. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night.